Cracking open a cold one for this one. What is up, my book friends? I'm coming at you this week with a little bit of a wild card, I think, but I want to come in sometimes and mix it up. Instead of talking about one book in particular, we're going to travel back in time, back to 2010. The housing crisis is kicking your family in the butt and you're just sitting alone in your room reading books, either because your school made you or because you found one in the library and you were able to smuggle it home. We're going to be ranking middle school books that either you had to read or you chose to read in the mid-2000s. We're gonna be shifting over to this here stream setup. I do stream on Thursdays. I play video games and talk about whatever people want to talk about on those days. I stream at 6 p.m. PST. If you happen to want to check me out, I got a link for my Twitch down in the bio. We're gonna be talking about some books from the good old days, courtesy of one of my good friends. I'm going into this blind. Until clicking on this link, I didn't really know what these books were going to be. A lot of these books I have not read since my middle school days. We're just gonna do top of the dome, hot takes. No one's gonna like my tier system. These are not researched opinions. These are off the dome thoughts I have about books I haven't read in 12 to 15 years. Please do not take these as more than just a meme. I'm gonna be honest here. I do want you coming for me in the comments because that drives interaction, but don't think I'm a gross person because I don't like Aragon. Okay, first on the list, we're doing Fablehaven. Fablehaven is easily an S tier book. You go read that 5-book series by that nice Mormon man, also named Brandon, unrelated to the Cosmere Brandon, right now, and you tell me that is not some of the best middle grade fiction that you've ever read in your life. Fablehaven follows a sister and brother who, after the death of one set of their grandparents, get sent off to the other set of their grandparents up in the hills, far away from civilization. Throughout the book, they slowly realize that their grandparents are caretakers for Fablehaven, this kind of wildlife preserve, but for all things magical. I read this book series probably when I was in 6th grade, maybe 7th grade. Brandon Mull came to my school and talked about writing and talked about reading. I hunted him down 4 or 5 more times after that to make sure I got every single one of these books signed. It was honestly what got me back into reading after a long time, and I still go back. I think I just reread these books maybe last year. They are some of the most fun and most interesting takes on fantasy in kind of an urban setting that I've seen in quite a long time. Hey, if you want cool things happening at all times, do you like demons? Do you like fairy warriors? Do you like big cows? You should check out Fablehaven. Next on this list, we got Hunger Games. I'm gonna be honest with you. I had to read Hunger Games in 8th grade. I was forced. It was an assigned book for my 8th grade reading. It was essentially the only thing we read the whole year. We had to read that, and then we read Flowers for Algernon. And I'm gonna be real, I think Hunger Games is probably a hard, we'll put it in the B category. Hunger Games is really cool until you think about it a little bit. The whole reason it was taught in class was to teach about the desensitization of murder for children and how you can just be willing to kill anyone whenever you want. But at the end of the day, the story structure still had to create this villain in that alpha pack of kids that then gives Katniss kind of permission to kill them instead of she has to do it because that's the situation she's in. It's more no, these are really bad people that are just going around murdering kids, so it's fine to kill them. That kind of undercuts the whole thematic premise of the book, I feel, so we're gonna put that in the B category with the potential for moving down, honestly. Next up, we're gonna throw Harry Potter right into the C category. Harry Potter was a book that we're gonna skip over all the pretense of there being a problematic author behind everything that's going on, and just looking at it from a book perspective, it's still not great. I will not undercut how impactful Harry Potter was in the early 2000s and probably still today for people getting into reading. I read the first book with my mom when I was in kindergarten. I would read a paragraph and then she would read a paragraph, and we got through that whole book. And then I think for the next 5 years of my life, every single required reading for school was just me bringing in a big Harry Potter book and reading it the whole year because I was a pretty slow reader. And the problem with Harry Potter is the defense for a lot of the writing and occurrences in Harry Potter are always, oh, it's a kid's book. It can't be a beautiful piece of literary work. And I say, nay, go look at Fablehaven in my S tier because Harry Potter has so many problems from a writing perspective. And it can definitely ruin a young reader in what their expectations are for good writing. And I feel like, as cool as parts are, as much as you can still really like that book series, I certainly think that there are better books that you can be reading in this time. And so I'm just gonna have to plop it into the C tier. As much as I really liked it as a kid, the more and more I go back and think about it, there's just better things. Speaking of better things, we're plopping Hobbit right into the A tier. I think that it doesn't make S tier exclusively because if you're reading this for middle school or if you're reading this as a kid, it's Tolkien. It's 1945. You just won the World War, the Second World War. Your writing is going to be a little dated. It's beautiful. The prose is amazing. However, I'm a kid. I don't really care about that. I just want to read a book. And so it's a bit harder to push it into S tier for me. I remember struggling with reading The Hobbit when I was young. I loved it. That was an amazing book, but it felt like an old book. And so I had a hard time with it. While I definitely think that you should read it no matter what, I can't give it the S tier. And you know, hey, come at me in the comments if you got an issue with that take, because I know, like, if you were to ask me what my feelings are if this weren't assigned as middle grade reading, I would put it in the top tier. That's a beautiful book. But reading it as a middle schooler, damn, it just felt like old. Next up on the list, coming in, I got you another S tier book. To Kill a Mockingbird is a beautiful book. I read it in 9th grade. We'll call that middle school to fit the theming of this video. I think it massively approaches and subverts the idea of like a white savior kind of thing. I think that one of the best characters in like classic literature is Atticus Finch. Having this story be told through the eyes of the two children is perfect. Harper Lee wrote a second book 90 years later, and I have no idea if it's good or not, but Harper Lee wrote one banger and she went, this is all I'm gonna do, and I'm going to change people's lives for the rest of time. And it's gotta sit in the S tier for me because of that. I remember reading it and really changing what I thought reading could do for the first time in a long time. And that was like a pivotal moment for me in reading. Hey, we were talking about C.S. Lewis. Oh, what's this? Narnia. I'm dropping it in the D tier. If I have to pick a side on the C.S. Lewis Tolkien war, I'm on Tolkien's side. I don't like C.S. Lewis. I don't like his books. I don't think there's any specific thing that I don't like. I just think I am against the anachronisms of the Bible being so intertwined with this book. And that's not to say I'm anti-religious or anything like that. I just feel like it was too on the nose. I don't want to hear about the daughters of Eve and the sons of Adam. I just want a lion that goes around eating people. You feel me? I got problems with it. Maybe I'll do a whole video on Narnia. But speaking of religious anachronisms, the Golden Compass is going to slide right into A tier. I know I literally just said it, and maybe, hey, the people say that the Golden Compass is the atheist's fantasy. I disagree. I think the Golden Compass is an amazing book, and I think it has a lot of comments that it's specifically targeting not necessarily religion, but the organizations and institutions that use religion more as a weapon than as something that can be better for people. I personally believe that religion is a really important thing in people's lives, and it's really good to create those kind of like communities and societies. But the moment that an institution decides to weaponize that and use it to harm other people, we have a problem. And I think that's the exact thing that the Golden Compass is talking about. As well as, I really want a little animal that'll follow me around for the rest of my life. I think that's really cool. Or an armored bear. I'm down for either. Philip Pullman's not anti-religion. He's definitely anti-religious institution. And that can be hard to kind of split away from what he's saying there. But I think he does do it really well. And so that's going to sit in the A tier for me. Oh, hey, is that Divergent? That's just a Hunger Games clone. That's going in the D tier. I had a lot of friends that read Divergent as a kid. I had a lot of friends that loved Divergent. I think Divergent was probably, you know what? We'll move it to the C tier. Yeah, I'm gonna do it. I'll move it to the C tier. It's definitely better than C.S. Lewis, exclusively to give C.S. Lewis like kind of like a punch in the face. Divergent is definitely, it was in that dystopian era, right? It hits all those tropes. I think it probably does it better than some of the other books that were kind of chasing this cash cow that Hunger Games really kickstarted. You have other books that I feel are better in the dystopian genre of the 2010s, late 2000s. Like, I think Uglies was really cool. Maybe I don't anymore. I would would definitely have to reread that book series to have a real strong opinion on it. But I just feel like Divergent hit like, hey, do you want your stereotypical beat for beat dystopian YA novel? I think Divergent hits that. So I don't think it's complete trash. And I respect the people that like at least the first book, but I don't think I could give it anything higher than a C. And out of respect of those people, I'll give it that. Now, we are going to move Maze Runner into the B tier because I do feel like that did dystopian well. I think that's the ontological mystery of how did we get into this maze area, what's going on, and then that reveal that occurs that shows you what's actually happening and that expanding of the world that happens at the end blew my 12-year-old mind. So it's got to go into B tier, right? I don't think I can confidently put a trope chaser higher than B tier, but it's definitely got to sit higher than Divergent. I was trying to think of books mere moments ago that were better than Divergent that were in this, and there it is. It's right there. Maze Runner did it better. You know what? I'll even move it. I think Maze Runner's a better book than The Hunger Games, exclusively because Hunger Games was good, and then the other two books were kind of not great. I'm gonna go back to talking about The Hunger Games for a minute. Why did they do my boy Finnick Odair so dirty? He got a single line about his death, and it was awful. Finnick Odair was the best character, and he needed more for his death. Speaking of chasing a trope, I'm gonna have to put Aragon in the D category. I'm so sorry, people that really liked Aragon. I'm so sorry, Christopher Paolini. You were but a mere 16-year-old baby boy when you wrote this book, and I think that really shows. Aragon feels like you read Joseph Campbell and then just took his hero's journey and slapped it in here and then kind of painted it over with a Lord of the Rings finish, which is the same critique I would give to Star Wars. So I guess I would say that Aragon is just Star Wars but in a fantasy world, and just read Lord of the Rings. I am very anti Lord of the Rings clones when you could just read Lord of the Rings. If you really like that genre, you want to see like what can be done with it after you read Lord of the Rings, read Wheel of Time. But like Aragon, Sword of Shannara, like these books just feel like not even fan fiction, but just like worse versions. It's like every time you clone something, it gets grosser. That's what these books feel like. We're gonna go into a little small brief segment here called Books I Was Forced to Read and actually really enjoyed. And first on that list is Hatchet by Gary Paulsen. That book was amazing. Every scene in that book has stuck with me for literally my entire life. I'll never forget that the moment when he had to like dive through the body of the plane to try and collect, what was it, med supplies maybe? I can't recall. Or like a briefcase. When he's in the cave and that roaring and it's described as like a train coming towards him and it's that giant tornado. Or when he's trying to burn money and he realizes it doesn't work, so he has to go get that white birch bark. Or literally when he's just sitting in the plane as the co-pilot and the pilot is having a heart attack and he's going through those steps of a heart attack and like the kid's too awkward to be like, yo, this guy's farting next to me. I'm not. And then they just crash. The plane just crashes and then the guy dies. That book sticks with me. It's got to be an S tier if I can literally remember that many scenes from a book that I read possibly in 5th or 4th grade. Hatchet, somehow it's got this little, oh man, what is this, the Newbery medal? The Newbery, for some reason in the early 2000s, the Newbery medal was like every book that got recommended out. Look, it's on The Giver too. It's on Bridge to Terabithia. They just wanted to plug all these like older books and it worked. Like The Giver is another one that I was forced to read. I'm going to put it in the A tier. The Giver was an amazing book. I think that people really don't like the movie to The Giver. I thought it was okay. It's definitely not as good as the book. I think a visual medium of having that move from black and white to color was really cool. I think it did something similar. It was kind of weird chronologically. I read The Giver and then I immediately watched Pleasantville right afterwards. Maybe it was for class. No, there was no way that was for class. It had Spider-Man in it. But I don't know. I drew a lot of connections to those two things in my brain and just like The Giver has stuck out ever since because of that. I also liked this idea of having the onus of someone be in a world where you have to hold on to the stories and the atrocities of the past. I thought that was really cool. Holes, I'm gonna be honest right now. I have a booktube channel and I've never read Holes. I'm gonna have to leave it down here. This is really unfortunate. I think the movie's really cool. I really like that stand-in JoJo, the Dio son that has the backstory that is just Holes, but I've never read the book Holes. Maybe I should read Holes. Get in the comments if you think I should read Holes. It's such a hole in my lip. I'm so funny. It's such a hole in my like literary backlog of books. I've just never thought that I should go read Holes, but my boy Stanley Yelnats is perfect in the movie. What's his name? Sacha Baron Cohen? No, Shia LaBeouf. Yeah, he was in that other movie. What was that other movie? Disturbia. Ah, man, I remember when his mom came in and like literally cut the cords to his TV with a scissors. I was so angry for him. Anyway, I haven't read Holes. I can't really comment on Holes. You know what? I'll say it probably wasn't better than that masterpiece movie, and we'll put it in the B tier with no prior knowledge. We're really leaving like a bunch of golden things. Oh, Where the Red Fern Grows. I'm putting that in D tier. I was forced to read it. I did not like it. I have no further comments on this book. If you liked this book, you are wrong. End of story. Similarly, I didn't read The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. I did read The Adventures of Huck Finn, and I also didn't like them. I was not a fan of Huck Finn, so I can only imagine I'm not a fan of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Things that I have read and have major problems with: Ender's Game. Ender's Game is going to go into D tier. I know that there's a lot of sci-fi fans out there that probably are going to lose their marbles at this rating. Ender's Game is bad. I'm telling you this as a friend. I'm warning you before you go ahead and make yourself a little fool down in those comments. I don't like Ender's Game. I don't like Orson Scott Card particularly, but separate from that, I think Ender's Game is kind of really weirdly paced. I think Ender's Game is kind of really weirdly characterized. I could do a whole entire rant on why I'm not a fan of Ender's Game. I think it probably falls into the same category of why I really hate Ready Player One. It feels like it's got a lot of cool things going on, but none of it matters. I didn't like any of it. Also, those kids were weirdly young, and that was kind of gross. Ender's Game is bottom of the D tier. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, however, I'll put it in the B tier. How about that? I think Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I mean, Roald Dahl has really good prose. We're gonna ignore we're gonna move it to C tier. Roald Dahl really just was totally fine enslaving the Oompa Loompas in that, and like, that was weird. Yeah, I like a lot of parts of it. Obviously, Willy Wonka's the villain of that story. I'm gonna give you a hot take right now and say that Charlie and the Chocolate Factory with Johnny Depp was a good movie. Everyone that disagrees is just too big of a stand for Gene Wilder, who is an amazing person, an amazing Willy Wonka, but I do think that both movies are great. The book, I also think, is really good. I don't think I would tell anyone to read it anymore. I don't think that's a book that you can confidently read and walk away from and go, that's still good, beyond like the classic prose that Roald Dahl had like a real good mastery of. I think a lot of the aspects of the book itself probably don't hold up to today's standards, and I probably would feel uncomfortable if someone came to me afterwards and was like, so I read that book about how that owner of that chocolate factory took a whole bunch of tiny people from their own indigenous place and then threw them into work. Yeah. Speaking of beautiful prose, we're throwing it in. That's it. It's in the S tier. We're gonna totally ignore the fact that the plotting for these books is kind of messy and there's some kind of silly stuff going on. I don't think that there was a person in the early 2000s that had a mastery of the English language as strong as Daniel Handler, aka Lemony Snicket. He's written other books that I also think are amazing, like We Are Pirates or Poison for Breakfast or The Basic Eight. Oh man, what's that one book? Why We Broke Up. I've been obsessed with Daniel Handler for a very long time. He's someone who is after my own heart, who learned poetry first. Every word has to have power, and he just expands that into full novels. And I really do feel that when I read his writing. And for him to be able to write at such an elevated level of prose, but at a level where it's still hilarious for kids, it's still a really fun time and so well paced, I gotta put it in S tier. That was one of the most impactful books on me when I was, I had to be in 3rd grade when I read that book. And I think by middle school, I reread all of them in middle school for fun. That book series is beautiful. Even if it's not perfect, these S tier books, you know what? Okay, this is the only one that's in S tier that, you've got me. We're putting it above Tolkien. I don't want to hurt anyone out there. We'll move it to A tier. I stand by, if I were to rank authors, Daniel Handler would be S tier, but Lemony Snicket and the Series of Unfortunate Events we'll put in the A tier. It's a strong contender. I do have problems with it, so we can't put it in the S tier because To Kill a Mockingbird, Hatchet, and Fablehaven are literally perfect 0 notes. Animorphs is good fun. You know what? We'll put it at the front of B tier. Animorphs is like your dime store paperbacks but also if you want to have some existential dread sprinkled in when you're in 4th grade and you're walking up to those beautiful big metal containers at the Scholastic Book Fair, and your mom gave you like $10 in quarters, and she's like, I don't know, pick books that'll make you smarter, and you grab an Animorphs book because look at this art, look at it, it's so weird. Oh my god, were those books horrific. There's like, I know that there's one where I think someone gets turned into an ant or a rat, and then they're left like that on an island, and then they don't get turned back, and then the island is just perpetually tortured by these like psychic screams of this person screaming forever because they're a person stuck as an animal. Horrifying things. There's like aliens, a lot of weird things going on in Animorphs, and that was really cool and probably negatively impactful to my mental health as a kid. But man, I loved reading Animorphs books. And you know, I've been dodging around it. I've been having this mental turmoil in my head, but I think I'm finally gonna bite the bullet. We're gonna put The Boy in the Striped Pajamas in the D tier. It's probably the best book of the D tier. Talking about this book and even leaving it on this list very much feels the same as when it was assigned to me for class. Not good. We're talking about World War II. We're talking about concentration camps, but I'm going to be honest with you. The Boy in the Striped Pajamas is such like a fictionalization of Auschwitz and such a fictionalization of the horrors that happened during the concentration camps that I feel like I can remove it. Whereas, I mean, if the Diary of Anne Frank were on here, I would just have to put it in its completely own category at the top and just be like, this is a book about Anne Frank's life. I have no comment. Like, it's a good book, but dang, am I not going to critique this because that would be horrible. I do feel I have some power in myself to say that The Boy in the Striped Pajamas is bad. It didn't feel good to read as a 13-year-old, partially because of the content and partially because it felt weird. And thinking back on it with this maturity that I've gained in the we're gonna say 50 years since my middle school days, it's still not good. There's like a lot of kind of infantilization and jokiness that goes on with these children that are happening in that book that I don't think I can let slide. I just think that there are better books to be telling kids to read. The Boy in the Striped Pajamas should not be given to children. Not because of the content, because it's bad. There you go. I did have to watch the movie, and I think the movie's probably better. I remember being way more impacted by the movie than the book, but maybe that's because I had a tiny child brain, and it was easier for moving pictures to affect me emotionally. But we'll leave it as Boy in Striped Pajama D tier bad. Next, we got the homie. We got Shel Silverstein. That's going in the S tier. This was the first book that my mom handed me when I was a kid. Where the Sidewalk Ends, A Light in the Attic. These are beautiful books. These are perfect poetry that I feel we don't see these kinds of children anthology poetry books come out anymore. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, you know what? If you know of more modern anthologized poetry books for children, throw them down in those comments because I'm pretty unaware of anything that like meets the expectations that Shel Silverstein set, I don't know, 50, 45, 70, 80 years ago. How old is this book? I don't know. It's beautiful. There's so many good poems in that book. Oh my God. Falling Up, Invitation, If You're a Dreamer, Come In, If You're a Dreamer, A Wisher, A Liar. Oh man, I can't get over how good some of those poems are. And there's some that are just tons of fun. Homework Machine was something that was so cool. And it's all tied together with this beautiful, like simplistic, kind of really sketchy art. Not like sketchy like sus, but like sketchy like, you know, the line work was so interesting and it felt childlike. Shel Silverstein really hit something that if you're looking at these books on this list, some of these things are literally a map out of like my history with reading step by step. And Where the Sidewalk Ends is one of the first things that I read. I know I've said it a lot, but a lot of these books impacted me and like my emotions towards reading. And I think Where the Sidewalk Ends was one of the very, very, very first things that showed me that words can make you feel things and words can mean so much, even if they're silly, even if they're just a big joke. I think to be able to tell those jokes in such a like sharp and witty way that Shel Silverstein did, it's got to be an S tier book for me. We're looking at The Lightning Thief. Lightning Thief, easily A tier. Percy Jackson and the Olympians is a great book series. Rick Riordan is a killer when it comes to writing. We're going to ignore the fact that book 2 is really weak and really bad, and we're going to look exclusively at The Lightning Thief for this one. I know the series as a whole is pretty good, and I know that Rick Riordan like grew as a person as he went, and I know this book was inspired inspired by wanting to create a main character for his kids that like they had dyslexia, and he really wanted to showcase that you can have dyslexia and be a hero of your own story. And so he created Percy. The fact that Percy Jackson is one of the only main characters in a book that if an adult is being whack, he's going to smack him. That's something that stood out to me as a kid. No, adults are problematic as well. And I think Lightning Thief really did that in a way that as a kid you can understand. And it always felt wrong when Percy Jackson was being kind of abused by these adult figures. And he knew it too. And that was so important to read as a kid. Also, obviously, you have this interweaving of like mythology with this like young, this middle grade stories. Who else? I mean, you had Egyptology, you had Greek mythology, you had all these books growing up. Am I right? I'm not the only one that had all those. Okay, maybe not. I need to reread all of these books. I plan on doing it. I've read the first 2 recently, actually, and I stand by. The second book is kind of poopy garbage, but the first book is still amazing and standout. My boy's from Long Island. I'm from Long Island. How can I not love Percy Jackson? Okay, he's not necessarily from Long Island. And also in the book, we can tell that Rick Riordan is also not from Long Island. They keep saying in Long Island instead of on Long Island, and you live on Long Island. I'm just, okay, next book. Goosebumps, S tier. We're not even questioning it. Goosebumps, you want horror as a kid? You want Slappy the doll? You want a camera that can tell your future and then make it happen? You want people that turn into werewolves? You want like parents that are vampires that have locked people in your basement and then you come out and you realize you also are a vampire? You want an ooze that'll come and eat the whole world? Goosebumps maybe completely structured my aesthetic likes for horror in any genre. I mean, the 90s Goosebumps TV show was life-changing for me. He's written like 3,000 of these books. There's going to be misses, but I think if you read the expected perfect books of Goosebumps, it's not going to steer you wrong. They're silly, they're zany, but some of them are really spooky and horrifying. I mean, when you're writing for kids, you gotta have the silly, zany, and some of the stuff that doesn't quite hit. Man, R.L. Stein's a killer. Ice in the veins. Next book, Inkheart, we're gonna put in B. I think the story and the idea of Inkheart is really cool. I think it's really interesting. I think the fact that they had my boy from The Mummy show up in the movie was really cool, but I think that the pacing and the length of this book just kind of do it a disservice. With a premise as interesting as the one of Inkheart, with like this book and you gotta go in and you gotta fight this villain and like maybe save your mom, it's really cool. It's really well done, and I can see why so many people love this. If you're talking about writers write about writing, Inkheart's probably one of the most titular things to point to for young books that are about that. It just didn't do it for me as a kid, and I definitely maybe should reread it. I remember when I had read it initially, I had a lot of problems with a lot of the pacing. It felt like it shouldn't be as long as it is. Not necessarily in like page length, but when I was reading, it just took a long time to get to things. And so, honestly, I'm gonna have to do it. I'm so sorry, Inkheart. We're knocking you to the C tier. You're probably better than I won't do. What am I doing? Roald Dahl's definitely better than Veronica Roth in this aspect. I have no idea how they are as people. The Outsiders, we're going to put Outsiders in A tier. I think The Outsiders is a really good book. I think it really works for kids. I think it's really interesting. It's set in Oklahoma, which is really weird because there's that musical Oklahoma, but we're going to move on from that. I think it touches on some really interesting things. I think it is probably one of the more impactful, just like real life nonfiction-y. I mean, I guess if you're reading this in 2010, it's historical fiction, right? It's about like the 50s, so we'll call it historical fiction, even though it's not necessarily. Also, it feels like a book for queer icons. I don't know. There's a lot of leather and a lot of skin wrestling, I think I remember. I really like The Outsiders. I think it was a really cool book. I was forced to read it, so I was really reading it begrudgingly, but I think I ended up finishing that book because I wanted to and not because I had to. And so what more can I say about a book than I didn't want to read it and then I really liked it. Bridge to Terabithia, I'm gonna have to put into C tier. Bridge to Terabithia is a very emotional and beautiful book, but I don't think it's doing the right things for a lot of it. I think as a kid, when you're reading it, you can get hit with those emotions, and that's really cool, and that feels really good to have that realization as a kid of just like feeling things. But if you think about the themes in that book, they're not really great. It feels like the main character gets punished for escapism, and that's not really a good thing. And it's also got that weird, like, I got a crush on the teacher, and the teacher's kind of going with it for a little bit, and then they go to that art museum. I don't know. I got a few problems with that. There's also like this weird theme of like apologia for abusive parents to some extent. I read this book very recently, for what it's worth. I didn't read Bridge to Terabithia as a kid. I watched the movie and I cried a lot, but I read Bridge to Terabithia kind of, I wouldn't say recently, let's say in the last 6 to 7 years. And so we're gonna put it in the C tier for those reasons. Artemis Fowl is a stone cold S tier killer. Artemis Fowl is some of the best young child fiction you could read. It's got guns, it's got big butlers, it's got fairies, it's got rockets from the powered by magma quakes. It's got the smartest Irish child this side of the Mississippi. Those two things don't go together. Artemis Fowl is so cool. Artemis Fowl was ruined by that movie, but the idea of having this kind of, it is urban fantasy. It really touches on a lot of like Irish mythology and brings it to a modern day. And it does that in a way that also modernizes the mythology. There's a lot of times where you'll have these stories of urban fantasy where, I don't know, all of the fairies and all these people just stopped progressing in like the 1500s, but Artemis Fowl actually progresses the technology of the fairies. Reasonably, they should have more technology than us, and that showcases here. And I thought that was such an interesting and unique approach to that idea, even when I was a kid. There's like 20 of these books. Ewan Colfer also wrote like The Supernaturalist, which was like a mind-boggling book that's totally not meant for kids, I don't think, but I read it when I was a kid. Maybe it is meant for kids, and it's just got like, and I was just thinking that when I was a kid, that it had more mature themes. I don't know. He's an amazing author, and Artemis Fowl is a killer series. You know what? We're gonna move it ahead of Goosebumps because of how banger it was. And finally, the last one on this list is Cirque Du Freak. Cirque Du Freak was a banger, certified. I don't know what to tell you. Everything about that book was cool. There was some versions of like vampire things, and there was a lot of vampire books going around when Cirque Du Freak was going on, so it was really cool from that aspect. This idea of escaping into the circus was really dope as a kid, and you got to like kind of live that through this guy. It was your classic like super busted Omega Mary Sue protagonist boy, but it was done in all the right ways. It was just a super fun read. Okay, we can't do this. We got a Golden Compass over here. Okay, this looks a bit better. These are required readings, so they're definitely the lower side of A tier. And then this is probably good. We'll say Maze Runner's better than The Hunger Games. Yeah, sure, why not? I didn't read the other Maze Runner books. I only read the first one, so maybe the rest are bad, but who knows? We're not going to talk about that. Yeah, Cirque Du Freak is a banger. It was so fun. And the cast of characters that existed in that book were so enjoyable and really cool. And I think that, you know, that movie was not good, but man, it had a banger cast, and I really felt like it lined up with a lot of my emotions towards those characters. You had like John C. Reilly as what was his name? Krebsley? I think Selma Hayek was in that movie, and I think Willem Dafoe was in that movie. This book series, I feel like no one talks about, but it was so fun. And there's so many of them. I think I have like, it was the first time where I had a book series like omnibus of the first 3 or 5 books. And I think I read those in actually 2 days. It was nuts. That was the first time where I went, oh, I read books fast. Maybe it's because I really like this book. That was crazy. Easy to say, Cirque Du Freak, certified banger, A tier. No questions about it. And that brings us to the end. We have completed the hottest takes that I could possibly dish out. These are exclusively my opinions, having not read most of these books in a very long time. You know, maybe some of these takes are a little shaky. Maybe I can't recall all of the events that take place in some of these books. Maybe I can't remember the plot of the whole book. Who knows? I'm going exclusively on gut. But these are my opinions on these books that I had to read around the middle school era, and I had a ton of fun ranking them. Do you got problems with this tier list? I bet everyone does. If you do, why don't you shout your anger and rage down in those comments at me? And if you haven't yet, you should read Fablehaven. That's the whole point of this video, was so I could talk about Fablehaven. Not actually. I was honestly surprised to see it on here. I'm very thankful for the friend who made this tier list for me, so they gave me a full platform to talk about Fablehaven. I'm gonna do it a little bit more. Fablehaven is awesome. It's got time travel, it's got fairies, it's got satyrs, which I, as a 5th grader, awkwardly said in front of 550 people, satires in front of Brandon Mull, and he had to correct me. That was really, I will never forget that terrible moment. read Fablehaven if you're not going to read anything else on this book list. What would you put in your S tier? Not even from this list. Ignore this list. Take it out of your mind. If you're whoosh, whoosh, going back in time to your middle school, like elementary school age, what were those most impactful books for you as a kid that really solidified your love for reading? Let me know down in those comments below. And while you're down there, why don't you hit that like button? And if you haven't yet, why don't you hit that subscribe button? I'm talking about books all the time. I want to talk about other things as well that look at narrative craft, manga, anime, video game. I don't know. We're doing some back-end management to figure out what we can talk about that'll keep everyone happy. Thank you so much for checking out this video. I'll catch you in the next one. And until then, stay lit.